Let's continue coding up our search view. And so as I mentioned in the last video, the goal for this video is to now reduce this title size here whenever it occupies more than one line. Okay, so basically what we want is for these main titles always to occupy just one line. Now we also don't want to cut words in half. So in this case here, imagine we don't want the CRU, for example, to be up here and then having the rest of the word cut out. So we only want entire words here and then followed by like 3 dots. Okay, so that's kind of a tricky small algorithm that we have to write here. And so let's see if we can pull it off. Okay, so I'm going to add a new function in here. And once more, it will be like a private function. So it's a function that we don't need in the outside world. So const limit recipe title. And what we receive here is a recipe. And we can also receive a limit. So limit of characters that is acceptable as the maximum length of the title. Okay. And let's now actually use something that we talked about in the ES 2015 or ES6 section, which is default parameters. So let's set this one here to 17. And I found out through experimentation that 17 is really the sweet spot here. So it's the best limit for this kind of layout here. But of course we could pass other limits into here. But if we don't pass any limit into the function, then 17 is the one that will be used. Okay. Now the first thing that we're going to do is to test if the length of the title is actually longer than the limit, because only then we need to do something, right? And here it should actually be title and not recipe. So we're only going to pass the title into this one. So if the title dot length is greater than the limit, then we have to do something. And else we will simply return the title again. And I'm not going to write the else statement here actually. So I'm not going to do this one here and then put return title in here, because we're going to have a return statement in here as well. And then it's a good practice to just leave it like this, okay? So we're either going to return something from here and then the function finishes anyway. And if this test here turns out to be false, then we move on to this one here and return the title as it was before. Okay, so this of course only applies if the title is longer than the limit that we defined. So how are we going to pull this off? Well, the best strategy that I came up with is to split the title into its words and then use the reduce method on the resulting array, which then allows us to have an accumulator. And that accumulator is just like a variable that we can add to in each iteration of the loop. And what we're then going to do in each iteration of the loop is to test if the current title length plus the next word is still under the maximum length. Okay, so that sounds probably a bit complicated, so let me write it out in code here, and then it will make total sense. Okay, so we take the title and then split it. So split is a method that is available on all strings, and we split it by the space. Okay, so let's simply write an example string here as a comment. So pasta with tomato and spinach, for example. Okay, and so by splitting it by the space, this will turn into an array with 5 elements: pasta with tomato and spinach. Okay, and so since we now have an array, we can use the reduce method on it. So reduce, and then we pass a callback function which has the accumulator and the current value as the input. So X stands for accumulator and then the current. Okay. Well, let's just write current like this. All right. So this callback function is the first parameter to the reduce method, and then the second one is the initial value of the accumulator, which should be 0. So we start with an accumulator of 0, and then throughout these loops, we will add to it. Okay, and I will explain you how and why here in the next steps. So let's actually experiment with this example string here and go through each of these iterations here just to show you how this actually works. All right. So in the first iteration, the accumulator is of course 0, right? As we defined down here. Now we are going to test now in each iteration if the accumulator plus the current dot length. So that's the length of the current word if it's still under or equal the limit. Okay, and if it is so, then we will push this word into a new array. So let's actually create that array like up here. So a constant new title and just a new array. Okay, and this is a constant which we cannot really mutate, right? So why are we starting it as a new array and then keep adding stuff to it? Well, that's possible because adding stuff to an array is not really mutating the underlying variable itself. And so the title can perfectly be a constant and we can still keep adding stuff into the array. And the same goes, of course, for objects. Okay, so new title dot push the current word. So let's see why this makes sense. So again, the accumulator in the first one is 0. Then the accumulator plus the current length will be 0 plus 5, right? And 5, which is the result of this here, is still under the limit of 17. And so we can push this word into the new title array. So let's write it out here, that the new title now has the word pasta in it. Okay, and finally we have to update the accumulator. And this works in the reduce function by returning a value. So the value that we return in each iteration of this loop in the callback function of the reduce method will be the new accumulator. So we return accumulator plus the current length. So that's exactly what we did up there in the test. Okay, and so now in the next iteration, the accumulator will be 5. Right? And let's actually copy this part here so that we don't have to do it over and over again. And so again, this is here just to simulate what happens in each iteration as we go through this. Okay, so in the second iteration, we're now looking at the word with, right? And so 5 plus 4 is 9, okay? And so 9 is still less than the limit of 17, and so we can add the word with to the array. So let's do that. And then next we return the accumulator plus current length, which will be 9. So in the next iteration, we will have 9 as the accumulator. The next word is tomato, so 6 plus 9 is 15. And 15 is still less than 17. So we can add the word tomato. Right? Then next iteration, now the accumulator is 15. And the next word is and, which is 3. So the current length is now 18, which is of course more than the limit. And so this word is not pushed into the array for the new title. Okay? Up here I'm actually missing the word tomato here. It's not a problem really, it's just so that it doesn't confuse you. Okay? Then in the next iteration, we will look at the word spinach here. And so just to make it really complete, we now have 18 here in the accumulator, plus the length of spinach makes it 24. And so of course it still doesn't pass this test here, and so spinach is also not pushed into the new array, and that's actually it. So we looked at all the 5 words, and our final array is pasta with tomato. Okay? So let's now actually return the result. So let's return, and I'm going to put this in a template string again, or new title, and then we can use the join method. And this is basically the opposite of split. So what this will do is that it will join the elements of an array into a string separated by spaces. And so that puts it back into a sentence with spaces between the words. Okay, and then the 3 dots. Oh, and I forgot to close this one here. And okay, so we have our new title, which is this array of the words, which will be joined by putting spaces into the words and then add the 3 dots to show that the title is longer than just the words that are displayed. So I hope this made sense to you. And we could have done this here with the for each method and having an external variable here for the accumulator. And we could have then in each of these iterations have updated that external variable. But the reduce method already has the accumulator built in, and so I thought it's a good idea and a good use case to use this method here. So we had to go through all of this a bit complex algorithm here just because we don't want to cut the words into halves and want full words always in our title sentence. And if you found a simpler way of doing this, then please let me know in the Q&A, but I think this is here actually a good solution and a good use case for some of the JavaScript features like reduce. And it's also always a good thought experiment to come up with this kind of code, right? So let's now actually use this method here. So I'm going to copy it, and where we need it is here in the render recipe function. So here is where we print the title. And so all we need to do is to insert it here and pass in the title, and that's it. So we could now pass here the limit, but as you know, we have it preset to 17, and so there's no need to pass the additional argument into it. So you notice that here in this curly braces in the template string, we can not only use the variables directly, but we can also include functions like I did here, and so that's pretty handy here as well. Okay, so let's now actually test this out. So I'm using pizza again, and let's see. And indeed, here we go. Well, there's something wrong here, so a small bug somewhere where I'm inserting the parentheses. And yeah, here it is. So that shouldn't be there. And so let's now check it out again. Writing pizza. So if you count the characters here now, you will see that they're never more than 17. So 4 and 9 and 14. So that's less than 17. Here we have 4, 8, 13. Here we didn't even need to apply the algorithm. And so we immediately just returned the title because it's only 8 characters long. This one is also less than 17. And so you see that all of them are just on one line now. If we were to increase this here, let's say to 20, then there will probably already be some words that are different. And let's actually do it here. So we can pass 20 now to overwrite that 17. Let's give it a try now. Yeah, we really need that spinner here for the feedback. And so you see that here, these 3 dots, they now moved to the second line already. So that one was too long. Here is the same situation. Here is the same thing. And so, yeah, 17 is really the sweet spot that's best here. Okay, so that's done. And now all there really is to do is to implement this small spinner here that rotates while we are fetching our data from the API. So in order to give the user the feedback that we're actually doing something here and that the app is working. So let's do that right in the next video.